How can we make sense of happiness in the light of evolution?
If you don't take the evolutionary perspective, you are not necessarily asking the right question or all the questions that you should ask. If you take this simple angle, you can really understand the features of happiness, the basic features of happiness, and even the practical features of what makes you happy, when it makes you happy, and why.
Dr. Lionel Page is the author of the Substack Optimally Irrational, where he writes about various topics, including evolutionary psychology, happiness, and economics. Dr. Page is also a professor of economics at the University of Queensland. Dr. Lionel Page, bonjour et bienvenue. Merci pour parler avec moi.
Bonjour.
You wrote some excellent articles on happiness from an evolutionary perspective on your Substack, which of course will be linked below. What do you think an evolutionary lens can contribute to happiness? How can we look at it through an evolutionary lens, and how can we make sense of happiness in the light of evolution?
Right. Well, thanks for your interest and thanks for the invitation, Nicola. Why is evolution important? You know, there's this famous biologist who in the 70s said, nothing in life makes sense, in biology, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And I think that's an insight which is obviously very well known in evolutionary biology, but is not enough appreciated in other behavioral sciences, in social science in particular. And something that a lot of social science discourse is kind of built as if evolution was either ignored or not necessary to understand. And I think that's often lead us in intellectual impasses. Like we're going in places where it's conceptually misguided simply because we're asking the wrong question. So we have to, I think it's very important, not that we have to think about evolution all the time, but whatever we do has to be compatible with the reality that we are at the end, not at the end, which we are the product of an extremely long process of evolution. Richard Dawkins, in one of his books, emphasized how kind of counterintuitive the timeline of evolution is. That the time taken by evolution is, we think in terms of our lives is in terms of decades. And obviously we can think about, more than decades, centuries, etc. Evolution is just the time evolution has taken is incredibly long. And because it's incredibly long, it has been able to do things which seems to us maybe unlikely. Like our cognition, all our brain, is really the product of an incredible amount of time where organisms have been selected. And what have they been selected for? They have been selected for making decisions. One question you may have, an initial discussion you may have at the very start of any behavioral science is, why do we have a brain? Well, if you look in a room and you have a plant doesn't have a brain. Why do you have a brain, and why does this plant doesn't have a brain? Well, there's a key difference between a plant and an animal. An animal, as you could even come back to the origin of the word, comes from animated. So an animal is something which moves. As soon as you move, you need to make decisions. As basic as moving forward or not, going on the right, going on the left. An animal is going to make decisions about looking for food, about evading predators, finding resources, evading predators, finding mates, etc. So because you have to make decisions, you have to process information, to assess your different options, and to choose the best option. That is a key thing, a key difference between animals and plants. Plants have to make some decisions, but obviously they don't choose location, etc. They don't change location. Once you have that, I think that you could add an insight to Dobzhansky's point about evolution being a key to understand anything about biology. I think you'd say that making decisions is key to understand anything about our psychology. That is, anything which is happening in your brain has to be understood because it helps you make decisions. We don't have a brain for your brain to have ideas, to entertain the world, etc. Everything which is about our cognition is to help us navigate the world, navigate physically the world in terms of your movement, but also navigate the complexity of, more abstractly when you have to deal with, make decisions about, for instance, like social decisions, how do you behave with friends, etc. Anything in your cognition has been selected by an incredible amount of time from, very early small organisms, which makes very basic decisions. They have like a bit of information in terms of they have a light receptive cell at the top of their body, and they decide whether to move in shade or not in shade. And from this, which is like, something like 3 billion years ago to now, organisms have been selected for processing information and make decisions about options. And then we arrive here with us, who are, a descendant from apes living in semi-social environment. And our brain is an extremely complex organ. It's said that it's one of the most complex things that we know in the universe. And we know a lot of things about how our brain works, but there's a lot of mystery still, because it's very, very complex. And we see that in the development of artificial intelligence. In a way, we're kind of discovering, as we try to produce intelligence in another way, things about what is being intelligent. We are actually redefining the question: what is being intelligent? What is our brain producing? And so our brain is designed to help us make decisions. So now, if you take this perspective and you ask questions about our psychology, it really, I think, it gives us a key to make sense about a lot of what we think we often see as mysteries, as puzzles. And one of these puzzles, one of these mysteries is about happiness. So, people want to be happy. Chasing happiness is often a key goal in our lives. You hear people say that that's what I want to be happy. I just want to be happy. If only I could get that, I would be happy, etc. So we have this thing called happiness, but at the same time, you have these kind of puzzles. We also find that very successful people often are not happy. You've got these big celebrities. You would think that they would be happy to be celebrities, but often they are depressed. Sometimes they even commit suicide. You have a lot of that. And so it seems a bit strange maybe that this is happening. And often, even in your life, you set yourself goals about what would make you happy. But once you reach these goals, if you reach these goals, often you find yourself eventually dissatisfied or not as happy as you predicted. So you have all these kind of strange features of happiness, and you have this literature, you have a lot of books about how to be happy, these self-help books giving you recipes. The secret to happiness is this, or the secret to happiness is that. And I think in one of my Substack, I use a metaphor of the blind and the elephant. And you know this metaphor when you have I think it's from India, when you have several blind people and they are touching an elephant, and because they are blind, they only have a partial picture. So one of the blind person touched the trunk and said, an elephant is kind of long and cylindrical and wet at the end. And another one touched a leg and says, it's very big and it's straight. And another one touched the tail and says, there's a lot of hair. So they will have one element of reality, but they don't have the whole picture. And my argument is that this is what you get in a lot of the literature on happiness, because if you don't take the evolutionary perspective, you are not necessarily asking the right question or all the questions that you should ask. If you take an evolutionary perspective and if you say, well, happiness has to be here as any part of our cognition, it has to be here to help us make decisions in the world. And if you take this simple angle, you can really understand the features of happiness, the basic features of happiness, and even the practical features of what makes you happy, when it makes you happy, and why. So that's a key perspective I adopted, and I think that's what is fundamental. And I'm obviously very happy to discuss in more details, the implication of this perspective.
And I think that increasingly, especially as psychology advances, we'll find that the Dobzhansky quote will be, there will be a variant of it, that nothing in psychology makes sense except in the light of the theory of evolution. You wrote in one of your articles about primary versus secondary rewards. Tell me a bit about that.
One metaphor I use in one of my posts is to understand what evolution is doing. So evolution, obviously, is just a process. It's an impersonal process based on a series of replications with some mutations at each stage and a selection process. Okay, so it's not there's no designer. But Richard Dawkins, in one of his books, is called The Blind Watchmaker. He says, well, evolution looks like it's producing things which looks like they are designed. And that's why a lot of people who were against evolution said, evolution can't be true because look at this thing, like an eye, for instance. It is way too complex to have been designed randomly. And that's where Richard Dawkins, stresses on the fact that you say that because you don't understand. We fail to appreciate the length of evolution. No, evolution is not totally random. It's a series of based on a lot of random variations, but because of the selection pressure, it can lead to an increase in complexity, which is amazing. And he has a famous, if your listeners are interested, I encourage them to look on YouTube videos of Richard Dawkins explaining the evolution of the eye. It's fascinating how he has all the different steps, how you can go from a single light receptive cell to the modern human eye, by all these little steps, which are incrementally improving the quality of this organ to detect light and make decisions based on that. So once you take this perspective, you can really understand. No, I've lost my line. What was I answering? You have to cut this one.
I was asking about primary and secondary rewards. As for the eye, for the eye, the Richard Dawkins explaining the evolution of the eye, I'll link that below if any of the listeners want to find it. One comment before you go on about the rewards is that I find that people tend to be a lot more willing to accept micro-evolutionary explanations. For example, something like, let's say there are foxes in a climate and they get moved, let's say they get artificially moved north or whatever it is. And then you'll find that the ones that grow more fur are more able to survive. People seem a lot more willing to accept something like that as opposed to the more macro type evolution, like a fish turned into an ape, just because it seems totally absurd. But really, there's no qualitative difference between those two things. It's just within a population, there's variation. So each animal is organism is slightly different. And just reproductive success happens to be biased toward the ones that are slightly more effective. And eventually those end up reproducing more relative to the less effective ones. And the trait ends up taking over the population. And if that happens over hundreds of millions of years or billions of years, it's really fundamentally the same thing as the longer fur in the foxes in a colder climate. Yet it seems ridiculous because those timescales are very unintuitive to us, for one. And two, we see the difference between an ape and a fish, and we think, well, that's not even close to the same thing. Even though the genetic code is the same, the way of using the genetic code to make proteins, or rather to code for proteins, it's really fundamentally the same. If you look in the cells, they're very similar. Mm-hmm. But you see the external difference, not the internal homogeneity across animal life.
So I think you're right that these big differences are harder to think about. Mm-hmm. I would, however, say that my feeling is that the line of the debate has moved since, when Dawkins was writing 20 to 40 years ago. Dawkins was writing at a time where in the US it was there was much more influence from creationism, a rejection of evolution, full stop. And that was his main kind of target, I think, just to convince us evolution is right. And that's why he focused on, the eye and physiological things like that. I think since then, the kind of line has moved because I think creationism has really receded as a kind of major contender in the cultural discourse. But I think the line has moved to the psychology, right? So one evolutionary psychologist, Anne Campbell, she said that, now it's people think that evolution stops here, right? So the body is designed by evolution, but your mind is totally out, is not influenced by evolution.
Which is kind of silly because where is the mind coming from then?
Yeah, totally. No, I agree. And I think that is a big debate or the big missing debate in a lot of social sciences and behavioral sciences. And I wrote a post about that. I think that a big reason I think there are several reasons. I could do some sociology of science. One reason is that sciences want to have their own kind of, sphere of relevance. And sociology, for instance, was at the start of sociology, the father of sociology, Emile Durkheim, he famously wanted to remove psychology from sociology. So he didn't want to say that sociology is just a part of psychology. And so he argued that sociological facts are kind of, exist in themselves. They are not kind of, a byproduct of human psychology. There is something which emerges from people interacting with each other, which is purely sociological. And you could really think about that as a defense of their corner. So if I want to create a new discipline, I would say, well, my new discipline is different. So I'm going to have a way of explaining things which is specific to my discipline. And usually the other disciplines cannot explain that. And in a way, I think there's a bit of that where social sciences don't want biology to explain their thing. But I'm not sure this is the main thing, though. I think that there's one of the major opposition to it, I think, is somewhat political, is that if social scientists, bioscientists tend to be progressive and they want to improve the world, change the world for the better. And I think there is a view that if you think that biology is the main explanation for how people behave in the world and how the world works the way it works, it might be unappealing because you might think, well, if it's biological, you can't change it. Well, if everything is social or cultural, well, you can change society, you can change culture, you can improve culture. So I think there's a political appeal to having, what Steven Pinker talked a lot about in his book 20 years ago, the blank slate. So if you assume that humans are like a blank slate where culture and society writes what we become, well, maybe we can improve society by making society better, and then what we'll make a society where people are nicer, more cooperative, less selfish, or whatever. Well, if you think that the features of our psychology comes from evolution, you might be worried that, well, we can't prove as much. Maybe inequalities, for instance, are unavoidable, and there's no point trying to fight against inequality. So if you want to change the world, I can see that you might fear a tension between having a biological explanation versus your desire to change the world. So I think that's a key thing. I think it's misguided for plenty of reasons. We could talk about it. But I think that's the key. And so there is this resistance to have, as I say, evolution is fine. You talk about most of the body, you talk about the cells, the chemistry of the cells. People are willing to say, okay, evolution works. You talk about, as I said, the color of your hair, the color of your skin, the color of your eyes, that's fine. But the brain is something where I think there is a resistance. And it's regrettable because once you take an evolutionary length, you really get fascinating insights, I think. And that's what, I wrote about happiness, and it's clearly not specifically political or anything, but you can recover so much insight. It's fascinating. And I think these insights, unfortunately, are left on the side of the road by so much of behavioral science because they just don't want to entertain an evolution perspective.
Which is totally silly in my perspective, because the thing is, the world already is exactly as it is. And our discoveries, they're just going to tell us about how the world is. They're not going to change it. So it is misguided in that sense. And you're right. I think it's just a hindrance to building accurate models that we can actually use. And likewise, I think that people often will conflate. I may or may not have had instances of this in my personal life. I will not name names of people who will say to me something along the lines of, oh, well, if you believe in evolution, then why aren't you maximizing your genetic fitness? Why aren't you going to sperm banks? And the answer is because it's descriptive. It's not prescriptive. I have no desire to go to a sperm bank. However, the principle of organisms moving toward greater reproductive success relative to their conspecifics it's just a description of how the process works. It's not telling us what we have to or should or want to or any of that.
So I think here, Nicolas, you're really hitting on something very important. the question, why don't you go to SpareMac? I think it's a great question to answer, to really address some of the possible misconception about what an evolutionary perspective would lead to. And so when initially you asked me the question about primary reward and secondary reward. And what I wanted to say is that, okay, evolution is not a designer, but it's almost as if it was designing something which looks designed because of the length of time of the process. And so we can, as a metaphor, consider what are the problems that a designer would have to solve to make an organism like us, an organism who makes decisions in the world. So I think a good way of thinking about it is imagine that you are an engineer and your goal, your task is to design a robot which is going to have to make decisions in another world. Like let's say you want to send a robot in another planet. And you know some things about the planet, but you can't know everything because the world, there's some unknown in the world. Even for us, even if evolution designed us to be working efficiently in a given world, the world changed. You have like climate is changing. Like you look into the past, you had like huge swings over thousands of years, but huge swings about climates. New animals appear, new pathogens appear, etc. So, if you think of a designer, evolution, even if evolution is fast, evolution cannot design you perfectly for the world as it is now. It just can, over a long time, design you to be pretty good for a world which looks pretty much like it is now, but which can diverge in some unexpected ways. So if you think, you can think of the problem that evolution is facing as if you were an engineer and you have to design a robot to go on another planet, and this planet has like similar features to here, but maybe also some unexpected features. Okay, so the common features is that there is a common physics. So stones fall in the same way because there's gravity there, and you might have liquid, and the physics of liquid will be the same. So there's some kind of basic things that you can predict are going to work the same as here. And what you could do then, if you program your robot, is that you think like your robot doesn't need to learn these things that are going to be the same. So you can hard code in your robot some specific reaction because you know that how things are going to work. So for instance, if there is a rock falling towards your robot, you can say to your robot, anticipate the trajectory using these equations and just move away from it. You don't need to think about it. You can have this automatic reaction. Because that would save the life of your robot. But so you can think that all these hard-coded things, your robot would assess the value of different decisions based on some basic automatic reactions, and you can think of this as you encoding your robot what we could call primary rewards. It would be this is better than that, and the robot doesn't need to know why. The robot just needs to identify automatically these answers and react automatically to it. So what are these primary rewards for us? Well, there's basic things which, even if life is changing and the world is changing, are always going to work well or work badly for us. Drinking enough water during the day, getting food during the day, having shelter, not being too hot or too cold, having the right level of temperature. These are the basic things which are going to help us survive, right? Whatever, if you live in Siberia or in the middle of Africa, you still need to drink, you still need to eat, you still need to be not too hot, not too cold, etc. So, we have these primary rewards, the feeling that when you're hot and you drink a cold glass of water, it feels very good. This is your brain telling you what you should do, and you don't need to think about it. Now, there are things which are novel. You have plenty of situations which are going to be novel, and evolution would not have been able to anticipate all the type of novel situations that you will face. And in the same way, an engineer programming this robot to go on another planet would not be able to anticipate all the specific novel situations the robot would face. And so the solution here is to endow the robot with the ability to learn. That is, as the robot faces new situations, the robot would say, okay, I did this action in this novel situation, and the outcome was bad. So what do I learn? I know that maybe my action was not a good action. Next time I face the same situation, I will avoid it. Okay. And so the robot would learn the value of actions, and these learned values are what you can call secondary rewards. That is, progressively, the robot learns in this novel environment how to navigate the specific aspects of this novel environment and form secondary rewards. So now we can come back to us in the real world, in the modern world. Our modern world is very different from, the world where our ancestors were designed into. I mean, we drive cars, we walked in cities where you have plenty of people, we take elevators, we go in supermarkets where there's plenty of food, etc. And so in this world, we have to learn specific, we have to learn the good things to do and the right things to do in this world. And these are not specifically encoded in our brain by evolution, because evolution could not anticipate what would a supermarket be, like 10,000 years ago. And so the secondary rewards are the rewards associated with the thing in this world. For instance, we like money. Money is fairly novel, even if it was maybe several thousand years ago, but it's still fairly novel on an evolutionary point of view. And so we like money. We will like, for instance, like if you go on social media and you post something and you get lots of people liking it, you will you'll feel good about it. That is clearly not something that evolution said. If you receive likes on your post, feel good about it. But we have learned to like this thing. So these are secondary rewards. And so you have these two things. We have like the hard-coded thing and the thing we learn to navigate the world. And then now I can answer the question about why don't we go to the sperm bank. It's because, sperm bank is something totally outside of the world where evolution designed us for. So we don't have any primary reward for sperm bank, okay? And so that's why even if our cognition and our hedonic system is designed by evolution, it is not designed by evolution for this world. It's designed by evolution for the world we had before. So, what people like? Well, people like, to have a mate, to have a romantic relationship with somebody, because this is what's going to lead originally to have kids. And that's also people use contraceptive methods, which is obviously not conducive to kids, but we were our cognition and our hedonic system were selected at a time where there was no much contraceptive system. There was no pill, there was no condoms, etc. So you have this natural gap, and that's not a problem. I mean, taking an evolutionary perspective doesn't mean that people consciously, voluntarily, and actively seek to have as many kids as possible. Actually, most people don't, but people are driven by a system of rewards, which in our past would be the kind of thing which lead you to be safe, survive, have children, and help your children to survive, etc. Right? So that's what you have to. That's what people have to understand. It's not saying that people are obsessed objectively with having kids. That's not the answer.
And another topic on the vein of happiness and its evolutionary function, relativity of happiness is something you talked about in your articles, which makes sense from the perspective of the environment, as you said, not being one homogeneous environment that where it's always the same for all creatures. You would expect that sometimes you're in more favorable circumstances. The environment might be more auspicious in terms of getting food or whatever it might be. And sometimes you're in terrible environments. So you would expect somebody that, for example, take them in an average environment where they're happy if things go well, if they get food, let's say, and they're unhappy if they don't have food. Now you put them in an environment with food. For them being happy all the time becomes counterproductive at that point, because then they become complacent and they stop striving. With food, there's kind of a hard limit as to how much food you can have beneficially, which we have blown past in modern society, which is why we now have more deaths of overconsumption than underconsumption in America, which is, all things considered, it's great. It's much better than starving to death. But with certain goods like status, this isn't something you cap out at. There's not really a point where you don't want to be higher status. So tell me a bit about relativity and happiness.
Look, I think it's a great way to start once you get the evolutionary perspective. What kind of insights does it give us? I mean, there's, there's kind of a low level when you can start talking about what an evolutionary perspective gives you, is that happiness and what makes you happy is what, guides your choice to avoid the things which are bad. So you don't want to put your hand in the fire, you don't want to cut yourself, and guides you toward doing stuff which are good for your survival, like eating well, having friends, etc. Fine, but you can really push these implications a notch further by saying, okay, if our hedonic system, the part of our cognition which help us identify what makes us happy and drive us towards what makes us happy and avoid what makes us unhappy, if really it's designed for us to make decisions, and if evolution is this process which kind of push towards efficiency, then we should expect that this hedonic system is as efficient as possible. It's not just giving you a signal, a good, bad. It's like, what you could ask, what is the best way to design a system of good and bad signal? And then when you ask these questions, you are able to use tools from decision theory, etc., to answer questions, and then you recover some very intuitive answers. So one thing that you can first think of is that producing these signals is not free. Your brain is a computing machine, and it's amazingly efficient. So it basically works on 20 watts. So you look at a light bulb is a 20 watt energy device. Okay, 20 watts, when you have a laptop or a desktop, they use energy, and you can say it because when you touch them, they're hot. Okay, they release heat, which is the fact that they use energy and they produce energy. They produce heat as a consequence. So what's amazing with your brain is its computing power is really good. Like there's plenty of things that computers struggle to do and you're able to do. And though when you touch your head, it's not hot. So it's kind of this amazing biological thing which produces a lot of computation, complex thing that computers even sometimes struggle to do. And though it stays quite cool. But nonetheless, it is a computational machine. So when you have to choose between options, what is your brain doing? Your brain is trying to assess the values of the different options. So if I ask you a very simple question, like, do you want fish or steak? And maybe if you're a vegetarian, I should say, do you want the vegetarian option or steak in a restaurant? How do you do when you do this simple decision? Well, your brain is going to try to assess the value of each option. How do you assess the value? You could be retrieving from memory, last time you had a steak, how good it was, whether you're really hungry or not hungry, whether you like the type of steak here or not, etc. And very quickly, your brain is going to try to form these values. And it can, you might take only 1 second or 2 seconds to make the decision. But you can find from neuroscience studies that it looks very much like your brain is accumulating evidence in favor of the different option. And when you have enough confidence, you stop. And if you think that, the subjective value that you expect to have for one option is higher than the other. And you say, okay, I think I prefer steak. When you say steak, basically your brain has estimated the value of steak versus not steak and say, okay, steak. So this implies computations. This implies basically, your neurons processing information back and forth. It can be from memory. It can be from simulations. You can imagine, the sensation you would have if you were to eat the steak, and that helps you assess whether you want it or not. And this can be for a simple situation like that, or for a complex situation. If I say, do you want to take this job offer? Similarly, you will think about, okay, what would that mean? What are all the implications of this job offer? How good would I feel if I have this job? What are the costs of taking this job, etc.? And your feeling, what you experience as a feeling, a positive or negative feeling, is your brain assessing a value of this option versus the other option. So there are computations. Computations takes time. It takes you time to think about questions. And if you have to make bigger decisions, you take more time to go through, your feelings. But when you go through your feeling, is really assessing these options, looking at different angles, trying to, think about, make sure that you have consider all the possible implications, etc. So thinking requires times, and time is valuable. You don't. If you spend too much time making a decision, you can't do all the things. And so, ideally, you want your brain to take as little time as possible. But as I said, your brain is a computing machine, and computing is costly. So, what nature is facing is a trade-off. You could have a more efficient, a brain which is doing more computation, but you would have to have a bigger brain. We have one of the biggest brain relative to our body size in the animal kingdom, and one of the challenge basically of humans is to have babies where the big head going through the birth canal when they are born. Right, they have a big head. And that's one of the reasons human babies are born basically unable to do anything, because in a way they are born premature. Because of our big head, they have to be born at an early stage. And unlike animals who are born and they can walk in an instant, basically, humans are born premature because of our big head, which needs to continue to grow afterwards, and because of our brain. So the challenge here is that nature faces a constraint. We could be better at making calculations, faster calculations, but we would need a bigger brain. Like if you want a computer which has more computing power to play video games which are more demanding, you need a bigger computer. You need a faster computer. Okay, but that would be constraining. We would have to eat. Our brain already uses something like 40% of our intake. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's 40% of our intakes in terms of food. And so we would need to eat even more, to have an even bigger head, etc. All that has a cost. So you need to think about what nature has to find is a trade-off, the right balance between making enough computations fast to make good decisions, but at the same time, not investing in a hardware or brain which is so big and so demanding that we have to eat a lot of food that it's taken too much energy and it makes us inefficient and likely to have other problems. So now if you think about it, what is the right trade-off? Well, you can't have perfect computations because of this thing. You can't expect that nature will produce us with a supercomputer. It's just too demanding. So whatever computing capacity we have to use it optimally and efficiently, which means that we can't make perfect decisions. We just need to make decisions which are consistently good enough. And then now when you think about, when you make these decisions about values, you have this limited computing capacity to assess difference in values. And one way to optimally allocate this computing capacity is to focus on differences. You don't want to all the time compute everything. You just want to identify differences. You want to focus on divergence between options. So it's exactly the same thing as our eyes is doing. Your eyes, when you look around, your eyes don't assess the absolute level of luminosity for everything. That would be too demanding. What your eyes is doing is using differences in luminosity. So that's why if I turn off the light now in the room, everything will look black to me and I will struggle to see differences. But eventually my eyes are going to habituate and they are going to identify differences in this new environment. So your eyes track the variations in a given environment, the variations in luminosity. And similarly, the efficient way for a hedonic system to work is to track the variations in values in a given environment. So now we can go back to your initial point. If you are in an environment, for instance, where, let's say, there's not too much money, you don't have too much money, your hedonic system needs to track variations in terms of, $1, $2, $10, $100. These are small variations that are important if you don't have too much money. If you're selling hot dogs with a cart in the street, you want to make sure that people give you the right change. Like $5 difference in change does matter. You care about this $5, and your brain needs to track these small variations to care about it. But if you work as a hedge fund manager and you go to a shop and the change, you're mistaken $5, you're overcharged by $5. Maybe given your high income as a hedge fund manager, $5 for you is nothing because you don't need to track. Your brain doesn't need to allocate computing power to track these small differences anymore. Okay, and so that explains why you care about small differences in a setting where you face small variations, and you don't care about small variations in a setting when you face only huge variations, right? Because your brain power is allocated efficiently to track the variations which matter for your decisions. So that's one of the key insights you get. When you take this evolutionary perspective, then you can recover, and you think that evolution is making your cognition to be efficient, you can recover some interesting features and intuitive features of our hedonic system. Is that it is, as you say, reference dependent. It depends on the reference you are in.
And those references are sometimes, well, not sometimes, they are your expectations. But I suspect that often those expectations are either influenced by or even placed by those of others, either the expectations of others or more likely the actual circumstances of others. So if everybody, let's say if I have one mate and everyone has 0 mates, I'll be pretty satisfied with my lot. But if everybody has 10 mates and I have 2, I will be less satisfied than I would have been in the initial case, even though I have, in absolute terms, twice as many mates.
Yeah, so, something which is fascinating is that you have this convergence between the results from the research theoretical inquiry about what you would expect the feature from an optimal, efficient hedonic system would be, and the research in artificial intelligence. And the convergence started, in the 90s. You had researchers in neuroscience who started observing that the features of the firing of our neurons very much look like the features of, it looks like they were implementing basically a well-known algorithm in reinforcement learning to learn to form values and react to the world in order to navigate the world successfully. And what it was basically is that an efficient way of, forming these secondary rewards we talked about before is that as you navigate the world and you make decisions, you experience positive or negative consequences, and then you use these positive or negative consequences to form expectations about the values of your decisions. Like that in the future, when you face similar decisions, you have expectations, that is good, that is bad. And then you will only use the deviations relative to these expectations as a way to change your expectations. So like say, in one situation, let's say you have to go to work and you have 2 roads. You can take the highway or the road which is shorter, more straight, but you have like lots of lights that you have to cross. So do you take the highway, which is further, but there's no light, or do you take the road with light? And you could make this decision plenty of times, okay? And basically what it says is that to learn what is the best thing, you'll form expectations about highway, not highway. And then when you try one, you will revise your expectations based on the difference between what you experience and your expectation. And it looked very much like your neurons are exactly doing this. And so basically our hedonic system seems to be reacting to surprises to expectation. So what's going to happen when you undertake some actions is that you typically have some expectations. And if the outcome of your actions beat your expectations, you will experience a positive surprise, and you will experience satisfaction from this positive surprise. But if ever you do this action again and again, then you will progressively, your expectations will adjust, and you will not experience any more positive surprise. So if you expect something to happen, when this thing happens, you're not happy anymore because you just expect it. And I can give you a very simple example. Let's say you are in your office, and suddenly one day the manager says, we booked a new coffee machine for the office. And you think that's great. Now every morning I can have a coffee. So first morning when you try the coffee machine, it's great. You didn't have a coffee with this coffee machine. It's a free coffee. So you experience your free coffee in the morning and you enjoy it. And then, the next morning you have another coffee, etc. And I can tell you that in 3 months, when you try the coffee, it will not feel as good as the first coffee because now you expect it. So now you are in a situation where you expect your coffee in the morning. And so as you take it, it's normal. You're not surprised anymore by this coffee. What would happen is that if for whatever reason, maybe the machine is broken, you don't have your coffee, then you will feel frustrated. You're frustrated because relative to your expectations, you don't have what you expect. But there has been a variation between on the first day, you didn't expect a coffee, you're happy to have a coffee, versus at the end, you expect a coffee, you're not happy to have a coffee, but you're dissatisfied if you don't get what you expect you would have. Right? So our hedonic system is very much, looks like it's very much designed efficiently to track your expectation and then reward you for going over your expectation and penalize you for going below. And then to go precisely in your example you were giving, this hedonic system should incorporate all the possible information about what reasonable expectation you could have. So if you look people like you, your friends, and they have lots of friends, well, you should expect to have lots of friends like them because they are informative. You're observing people like you having lots of friends. It should tell you something about how many friends you could expect to have. So if you have less than them, it's normal to feel bad, not because you're envious or because you're spiteful, but because something tells you that something is wrong. Why do these people, are very successful socially while you're not? You should do something different. You change what you're doing to achieve what you could expect to have.
And imagine, I think a good way of illustrating this, because I attempted to explain this to some of my family members who don't have really a psychological, well, they don't really learn about psychology, some of them. And I said, picture that you have two hunter-gatherers in a tribe. Let's say that one of them kills a lion, and then the other one subsequently kills a lion as well. Let's say the first guy, he kills it, he's happy, he's getting the status and all of that. He gets the mates and all. And then the next morning he wakes up and he recalls with fondness the memory of killing the lion, and he thinks that he's still all that. He's still the big man in the tribe. But then after a week or so, he's thinking, it's kind of gone. That feeling is gone. It's time to kill another one, right? Or it's time to do something else. Contrarily, we can imagine the other hunter-gatherer. He kills a lion. He ends up happy. And then every time he thinks about it, he gets the same level of happiness. Again and again and again. Months later, he's sitting there rejoicing in having killed the lion. He's going to end up totally useless comparatively in terms of fitness, I suppose, for lack of a better term. Evolutionary fitness. I mean, not physical fitness necessarily. But that's like begging to be put into a dead end. The moment you become satisfied with your position is the moment that you quit moving upward. And the problem is, if you have a community of individuals that are totally satisfied with their position, one single individual who is prone to be ambitious and attempt to advance will eventually totally dominate that population in terms of success on all evolutionary fronts, really.
I think you nail a key fact about our hedonic system. And one of the main starting insight you get once you take an evolutionary perspective is that our hedonic system is not designed to make us happy. We're not designed to be happy. We're not designed to chase happiness, achieve it, attain it, and retain it. Happiness is a system of an information system to help us, to guide us toward actions which are going to be more evolutionarily successful, which is surviving, having kids, making sure kids survive, etc. So then we're reaching what you identified here is exactly what's going to happen. If you had a hedonic system where you can become happy and then that's it, you made it, you're super happy, well, what would you do? You would not do anything, right? If you were happy just enjoying the sun and eating, you would be on the beach, fishing a fish, enjoying the sun, okay. And that's great. And, I'm not making any moral judgment here. It's observing the fact that you do that. But if you are slightly more maybe neurotic and, once you catch a fish, you're happy, but you want more, you want to build a net to catch more fish, to sell more fish, to have a bigger house, etc. This person who is a bit more neurotic is going to actually be more successful in life. And our hedonic system is maybe, unfortunately, but it's designed to be successful. And so it's designed not for us to be satisfied and stop doing anything, but it's designed to drive us forward. And if ever we succeed and we achieve what we wanted to achieve, well, it's going to move the goalpost ahead. As you say, like you kill one lion, you're happy initially. You should be happy because this is your reward for having done something, successful. But you can't rest on your laurels. If you rest on your laurels, this would not be selected by evolution. The person who kind of, after having killed a lion, eventually become frustrated because this person wants to achieve something even more, this is the kind of person who is going to be more successful. And so a picture of our hedonic system you can have is that, it's like when people going on a donkey and trying the donkey to move. And so you can have a carrot along a stick, in front of the donkey and a stick at the back. So you can, when the donkey is not moving, you can hit the stick, so punish the donkey for not moving up. But you can also have the carrot, which is inducing the donkey to move forward. But the carrot should move forward as the donkey moves forward. If the donkey is able to catch and eat the carrot, it's going to stop. So the hedonic system has to kind of, always try to nudge you to go forward, maybe give you a bit of rewards if you move forward, but also continuously move the goalpost so that you keep being motivated. And one unfortunate aspect of it is that that explains why we can't reach and attain long-lasting happiness. It's an illusion. We believe that, if only I get this job, I'll be happy. This is the only thing I want in my life. And the fact is, our hedonic system is designed to make us believe that it's the case because we'll be happy. And we underestimate how eventually we will habituate to this new situation. We'll get frustrated and we want more. And when you watch, that's why I talked initially about all celebrities and rich and famous people being unhappy, and we find it surprising maybe because when we are not super rich and super famous, we think, if only I was rich and famous like this person, I would be happy, But the fact is that if you were to become rich and famous like these people, you'd be happy, to some extent, but eventually you would also habituate and you would have new problems. A famous kind of, not famous, I once heard a psychologist talking, he was a psychologist for millionaires and billionaires. And he said, people think that these people, they have to be happy, but often they are very miserable. Why? Well, there are two reasons. First, socially, they're often very lonely because they can't have friends. Anybody who is around them, often, they may wonder whether they're just interested to be around them for materialistic reason. But also, when you're a millionaire, now your next reference point, the people you can compare to, is your other millionaire or multimillionaire neighbors with an even bigger house, with a bigger yacht, a more famous painting in their lounging room than you, etc. And so their reference point has moved. And as a consequence, they also be frustrated because they could do even better and they are not, etc. So that's a key insight we get from this perspective.
You touched on this earlier about never getting lasting happiness. And you also wrote this. I want to quote one of your articles. You wrote, "It is common to think of happiness as something we could reach if we could get some of the things we want in our lives. This intuition is misleading. Happiness is designed to move us away or to move away from us as we progressively achieve the things we thought would make us happy." If you think for about 15 seconds, if you were designing a robot, you think to yourself, let's take your robot on another planet. You can tell it, how can I make this robot, also pulling back from the analogy of the donkey, carrot on the stick, how can I make this robot be more likely to engage in the behaviors I want it to engage in? How can I make it more likely to chase rewards? You can make it like the donkey. The donkey thinks it's going to get the stick. Or the carrot rather. It might get the stick, unfortunately. It thinks it's going to get the carrot, but it never will. The moment the donkey looks at the carrot and says, I'm never getting this, it's just going to stop moving. And that totally defeats the purpose. So from an evolutionary perspective, the only real expectation you'd have about lasting happiness is that we're not going to get it, one, and two, we always think we're going to get it because the moment we stop thinking that we'll get it, the intuition itself becomes useless.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the psychologist Daniel Kahneman who got a Nobel Prize in economics, for his, he was one of the founder, the pioneer of behavioral economics. He wrote in an article with other co-authors, he talked about the focusing illusion. And he defines the focusing illusion as the idea that, the thing you focus on, you believe will make you happy, usually we're mistaken. That's not the kind of thing which are going to make you happy. So one example he discusses a lot is people in the US who lives in states where it's cold. You may think, I don't know, like Minnesota, for instance, you have very cold winters, and they may think, oh, if only I was living in California, and maybe they watch on TV and there's all these palm trees and sun and it looks great. And they think if I was to live in California, I would be happy. My life would be great. So they imagine that just living in California is going to significantly impact their life. But then when you ask people in California, they don't look specifically more happy because for them, they take the sun for granted. Right?
Habituation.
Total habituation. So, we go back to what you were saying about how happiness motivates you. If you were to wake up in California every day and like, whoa, fantastic. There's a sun, it's beautiful, and I can see the blue sky, I'm enjoying, do you need to work harder for your next promotion? Do you need to work harder, to have to get a raise in income? Not necessarily, right? So somebody would just enjoy happening to be in a setting where everything is nicer than before, would actually not be driven to continue to strive to be successful. So your hedonic system is designed to just track the environment you are in and to set the reference point at the level of expectation. So if you're in California, you will not, typically after a while, once you habituate, you will not wake up every morning thinking it's fantastic, that it's sunny and it's warm. You'll take it for granted. You'll be a bit less happy when it's less sunny than usual, okay? But you'll take things for granted and then you'll work hard like people were in Minnesota. And so people don't anticipate that. And exactly, I think, for the reason you described, is that if our hedonic system, in a way, is working to motivate us. And to motivate us later, it will have to move the goalpost. But if we were aware now that the goalposts are going to move, then obviously it will contradict this motivation. Because if you are in Minnesota and you are aware that after 6 months in California, you'll be used to the sun, well, you may think there's no point moving to California because, in 6 months, I will not value that as much. So for you to be motivated, you need to like to anticipate that actually things will not continue to give you happiness as you think it will now.
You've written also about goals and the relationship of goals to, you talked about reference dependence, the relationship of goals to our expectations, goals as a reference. We might think that for arbitrary purposes, I want to have $1 million, and then we will rate our satisfaction with our progress relative to those $1 million, and the reference can be anything really. The thing is, the moment we realize that the achievement of goals will be almost entirely, I suspect that there are certain goals that actually would raise your happiness in a lasting manner, such as, for example, you might have the goal of building a social circle because you don't want to sit in your room alone all the time. The achievement of that goal probably will bring lasting happiness because it'll confer a positive change that will recur. And it seems to be the case that people with better social lives are in fact happier, and that seems to be lasting. I'd like to talk to you about lasting happiness in a little bit. But for the most part, you can realize that the achievement of goal won't really do anything, especially if it's something that you'll habituate to, such as getting a raise or something along those lines. At that rate, the question is, why would you achieve those goals? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's something I specifically worked on, goals and how to understand goals. So we can start with a puzzle. I said our hedonic system is here to make us make good decisions, okay? And it is dependent to a reference point. And we will be happy if we are above our reference point and unhappy if we are below the reference point. Now, there might there seems to be a puzzle here in the fact that often our happiness seems to be relative to a reference point, which is something we fix ourselves. We set ourselves goals, and if we achieve our goals, we're happy. And if we, at least just after achieving the goal, and if we fail to achieve our goals, we're unhappy, we're frustrated. So why do we have this ability to set a goal? And if we have this ability to set some goals, and these goals matter for our satisfaction, another simple question is like, why do we set high goals? If my happiness depends on my goals, why don't I set a very low goal? I could wake up in the morning and say, you know what, today I will just be happy if I go to work and nothing wrong happens. So I take my car, I go to the office, nothing wrong's happened. At the end of the day, I say, what a great day. So why don't I set these kind of goals instead of, people rather set goals like, oh, I want to get a promotion at the end of the year. So they work hard to get this promotion and they're frustrated if they don't get it. Why do we set high goals? If these goals, higher goals, makes it harder to become happy, while low goals would make it easy to be happy. So I think here we get into something a bit more maybe complex, but I think it's also super interesting. We can go back to the robot situation. So now imagine, you design your robot to make decisions in this world which is novel. And you can put a lot of recipes, hardwired recipes in the robot that in this kind of situation do this, in this kind of situation do that. But also, you need to know that there's plenty of situations which are going to be novel. And in that case, the robot will have to make decisions on its own. And what you would want ideally for your robots to do the best is to form expectations and to have these deviations relative to expectations. But what are these expectations? They are not expectations independent of the robot actions. They're actually the expectations about the best thing that the robot can do. What you want for your hedonic system to be efficient, you want your robot to be able to identify the best thing it could do given all the possible actions. And then, given that, there are random things which would happen, given the best actions that the robot could take, it could go well or bad, and there would be variations around this level, which is the best level in expectation that the robot can. So if the robot takes the best course of actions, is very reasonable, makes very good decisions, then in expectation, the robot will get a level, and sometimes things will go better than expected, and sometimes things go worse than expected. But this expectation then is dependent on the robot having made the best decisions possible. So now that's a much more complex type of expectations than just, my expectations about the weather today. So the weather doesn't depend on my actions. So there's an average level of good weather and bad weather which can happen during every day. But the expectations about, my expectations, for instance, about me being promoted at the end of the year depend on me doing the best I can to be promoted. It's not my expectations with me doing random things in the office. No, it's given the best I can do in the office. What are my expectations to be promoted at the end of the year? So now here we have a key problem because how does nature or the programmer, when programming the robot, how does the programmer knows what is the best thing that the robot can do? What is this best level that the robot can achieve? Given that the world into which the robot is going to live is very different, is going to be novel, it's unpredictable. So the solution here is to endow the robot with the ability to, to form a view about what is his best level that can be achieved. Okay, and to ask the robot to set the reference point, to set the expectations at this level. You need to give agency to the robot to identify what is the best thing it can do to set the reference point. But here when you do that, you have a problem, is that if you give agency to the robot to set this reference point, to set this goal, it's like a goal. This is the best thing I can do. I want to achieve that. If you give agency to the robot, and if you tell the robot, you'll be happy if you achieve this goal, then you potentially create a problem when the robot would have an incentive. If the robot is designed to chase happiness, to chase its rewards, the robot might just want to set a low goal. with a low goal, you get easy rewards. So you have this, the programmer faces contradiction. He wants to tell the robot, you need to chase rewards, but at the same time, you need to identify the best thing you can do and set the reference point there as high as possible. So there's a contradiction because as high as possible means less reward, right? As a robot as well to chase reward. And so the engineer has to solve this problem. And one solution of this problem is the following. You can tell the robot, look, first, set a goal as high as you possibly think, given the information you have about your environment, which you will know, I don't know. You have to set a goal as high as possible. And what I'll do is I'll give you a reward right now. When you set the goal, given the information you have, you'll have a reward for setting a high goal because I want you to set a goal which is as high as possible. I don't want you, however, to set a goal which is too high. If you set a goal which is too high, it's going to be inefficient. I don't want you to chase goals which are unachievable. So if you set a goal which is too high and you don't achieve your goal, you'll be penalized. Like you'll have a drop in satisfaction which is bigger than if you go above your goal. And so these two features gives you these two things give you two features of our Hedonic system. First, when you receive information, at the time you receive information about what you can achieve later, before you have done anything, you already feel good from a change in your expectations. So, if you are waiting to be promoted at the end of the year, and in the middle of the year, I tell you, the managers are very happy with your progress, and I think you're very likely to be promoted at the end of the year. Nothing has happened yet. This information is already going to change your expectations, and this change in expectation, you're already going to enjoy this as happiness now, even if the outcome has not appeared. So you're rewarded for your change in expectations, for setting your expectation as high as possible, given the information you have. But at the same time, if you set high expectations that you expect to be promoted, and eventually you're not, then you have what we call loss aversion in behavioral economics. That is failing to meet your expectations. You feel it. It's more intense as a feeling, as if you go above your expectation. So, it's very intuitive that, let's say you expect to have a pay rise of 10% at the end of the year. And if you're told, well, actually your pay rise is 15%, you feel happier than your expectations, you beat your expectations. But if I tell you your pay rise is 5%, you'll be more frustrated relatively, relative to 10%. Your drop in satisfaction is going to be larger when you have 5%, which is lower than your expectations, then comparatively your increase in happiness is when you have 15, which is higher. So, the variations in happiness are steeper when you fall below your expectation when you go above. And that also is a feature of an optimal system, which would lead you to set your expectations, your aspirations, as high as possible, but not too high. And so your hedonic system is really designed to induce you to try to identify what is the best thing you can do, what is the best outcome you can achieve. Then you set your expectations, your aspirations there. That's your goal. That's why you set high goals, because it feels good to set high goals, to aim as high as possible. But also, you shouldn't aim too high. So if you aim too high and you fail to achieve your aspirations, then you feel bad about it. And so in anticipation of these two things, a lot of things that people do is we manage our expectations. So if I give you some positive news, for instance, today, I say, I think you're very likely to be promoted at the end of the year. You will have this kind of tension in your mind. At one level, you feel good because this is good news. So you want to raise your expectations. And this raise in expectations, by the way, is going to induce you to change your behavior all through the rest of the year. If you think that you are in a good chance of being promoted, you may work even harder, right? So as I give you a positive news, it's going to change your expectations. But at the same time, you will be wary that if you set your expectations too high, you risk being disappointed if that doesn't happen, right? So you may be worried that if you set your expectations too high, that you are almost certain that you are going to get the promotion, you might be frustrated eventually not to get it. And so people manage their expectations by often saying, I don't want to set my aspirations too high, or I don't want to set my expectations too high because I don't want to be disappointed. Okay, so you feel good about setting your goals and your aspirations high, but at the same time, we are worried not to set them too high, not to be disappointed. And these two things are actually not a bug. They are a feature helping our hedonic system, nudging us to use our information in the best way to set our goals to the right level, to the kind of challenging level which is achievable if we try hard, not too high, but not too low.
Well, this makes sense because if you were designing a little capitalism bot, let's say, and you want it to maximize the amount of money it can make, let's say, for the sake of this hypothetical, that the capacity of the robot is to make $1 million. If you set the goal too low, for example, let's say we give the robot the goal of making $100, you've left $999,900 on the table right there because the robot hit 100 and it's just good. But then if you tell the robot you have 1 year to surpass Elon Musk, it's just never going to make it. That goal is way out of its bounds. And this intuitively checks out in the sense of if I were to say that I want to get a promotion by the end of the year, that's something I could probably do. So I'd feel good in initiating behavior toward that. Whereas if I say I'm going to be the next president of the United States, I'm just not going to feel good about any of the behavior I exhibit or any actions I take toward that goal because I know it's not going to happen. Foremost because I'm way too young for that and they wouldn't even let me. But even if I were old enough, it's just statistically speaking, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right here. So, I said your hedonic system is designed to identify variations around your expectations. And as I just said, these expectations should actually be the expectations by the best thing you can achieve. Okay, so we could call these specific expectations aspirations. The aspirations is a reasonable level of achievement you can expect if you do your best. Okay. Now, the computing capacity of your brain will be optimally allocated if you identify variations around these expectations, because that's what matters. You want to do better around the level that you can, where credibly your decisions can matter. Then that means that if you are able to, if you allocate your computing capacity to identify these variations here, they are not allocated to identify variations away from it. So in the same way as, my eyes and my brain now is well calibrated to identify variations in luminosity, given the distribution of luminosity in this room. If you were to set a hugely bright light in the room, then I would struggle to see anything. And similarly, if you were to turn off the light, I would struggle also to see differences. Okay, and exactly the same thing works with your hedonic system. That is, if you set your goal way too high, as becoming the president of the United States, then you will not perceive differences between variations in outcome around where you are. So now, if you set your goal to be president of the United States, then the 10% raise in income at the end of the year is inconsequential because you will not perceive, it doesn't matter anymore. Getting 10% raise or not percent raise, you're so far away from your goal that it will look like it's not important. As a consequence, if you're not able to discriminate between these two things, you may not work to achieve this higher outcome. And so that's why having a way too high goal is not good for your decisions, because you will not perceive the difference in the range of outcomes which actually matter for you. So if you wake up every morning thinking you're very sad because you're not Elon Musk, well, why work for your next promotion? Because your next promotion is not going to make you much closer from being rich like Elon Musk. And similarly, so that's, having a too high goal, thinking that you should be as rich as Elon Musk or becoming the president of the United States. And similarly, if your goal is way too low, that you wake up every morning thinking it's amazing that you're not homeless, that you have a roof above your head, etc. Well, why would you work for your next promotion? There's no need for it. Right? So these two things, too high goals and too low goals, are going to be suboptimal in how your hedonic system identify the next things to do for you to be a bit more successful. Your hedonic system should really track where you are now, what you can do next, and this next step versus not the best next step versus the not so best next step, and nudge you to try to care a lot about this next step, okay, around where you are.
We've talked quite a bit about theory, describing what it is that people do, what people actually do, and organisms in general. So now I want to get into prescription. What can we do given this knowledge? And since we're on the topic of goals, this is a great place to start. So I pulled up a quote here from Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky, a very prominent happiness researcher. She says, "Happy people are always pursuing something. There's always something around the corner." So then the question there is, we can say with reasonable justification that people are happier when they have goals. But, and I'm talking to the economist within, how can we maximize the hedonic utility of our goals? So how do we set our goals to get the most out of them? What are we looking at here? Or do we want to set goals, as you say, goals that are at the edge of our capacity? Do we want to set many smaller goals, so let's say more frequent yet less large goals? How would we design our goals with the knowledge of how our hedonic systems work to get more out of them?
My first answer here would be that I think there is a kind of a contradiction between the framework which I described here and the idea of maximizing happiness, because we can talk after that. I think there is some reasons to think that you can increase happiness to some extent. But if you take just what I've said until now, there's a contradiction with the idea that you can maximize happiness, because happiness is kind of the good subjective feelings you're going to get from beating your expectations. And your hedonic system is designed to carefully track the expectations of the best thing you can achieve. And so how happiness is going to happen in this framework? Well, I give you some news today that you can do better than what you have now. That makes you feel good. You move your expectations. You have positive satisfaction from this kind of news. And then you can strive to work toward that goal. As you work toward that goal, if you progress toward that goal, you will feel progressively more happy. Okay? You kind of consume the happiness of the goal as you progress towards achievement. That's why sometimes once you achieve the goal itself, it might feel a bit underwhelming, because actually you already consume a lot of the happiness as you were progressing toward the goal. Because as you progress toward the goal, progressively your expectation is that more and more you are going to achieve the goal. It's like when you watch a sports match, if your team is well ahead and it looks more and more like the team is going to win, you start being happy before the very end of the match, right? You don't just realize, oh, my team has won when the match is finished. No, like if there's only 5 minutes and your team is well ahead, you're pretty sure you're going to win, so you're already happy now. Okay, so you consume happiness as you progress toward the goal. But that means that the only thing that is going to change your happiness is surprise. That is, if you progress toward the goal, you get positive surprise, small positive surprise as you progress toward the goal, you get more happy. But if you get a setback as you were trying to progress toward the goal, you get a setback, that's a negative surprise, you're going to be unhappy. Everything eventually in this framework comes from positive and negative surprise. And by definition, surprises cannot be automatically engineered. You cannot engineer your own surprise. Like you cannot engineer a supply of continuous positive surprise, because eventually, you would expect that the surprises are going to come. So if you had a way to predictably generate surprises, you would not be surprised by this surprise. Right? So there's a contradiction here. So that's why the idea that you can design an approach, even an approach to goal setting, that's going to reliably generate happiness, there's a fundamental contradiction with this framework. We're not designed to be happy, we're designed to be successful, and happiness is designed to make us successful. As a consequence, it only rewards surprises. That makes reliably achieving happiness impossible. That's my first answer. Now, I think there's at least two reasons why you can achieve some level of happiness, but that's not by, I don't think, by necessarily doing what you said about the goals. I mean, one reason you can expect some reasonably some level of contentment or happiness in the long term is that the mechanism I described for you to set high goals versus not low goals. One implication of that is that if you have to have, for you to have loss aversion, for you to have a drop of happiness which is lower below your expectations than above your expectations, it means that, if your brain is able to, when your brain produces subjective values, there is basically the lowest level of happiness which you could have, which is when all your neurons, dopamine neurons, which kind of produce this subjective value, when they're all like not firing. So that's where the signal is bad. You feel bad. Your brain says you bad. Your team has lost a championship. Your girlfriend is broken with you. You feel very depressed. So that's low firing of your dopamine neurons. And when they're all firing, you feel ecstatic. So you have like these kind of two boundaries. The highest signal, the highest hedonic signals your brain can produce, and the lowest hedonic signal your brain can produce. For you to have loss aversion, for you to feel worse, failing expectations and meeting expectations, it means that your level of subjective satisfactions when you meet expectations has to be above half of this range. Okay, so it means that usually you meet your expectations, which we should expect. If these are your expectations, you should usually meet them. You should have an above average level of happiness. And that's what's found in the empirical studies on happiness. When people ask people, are you on a scale of 0 to 10, how happy are you? The kind of, the modal response is 6 or 7. So in everyday life, people are not just neutral, people are not miserable, they're kind of moderately happy. And that's what you would expect from you consistently meeting your expectations. Okay. So that's the first answer. And the second answer is that one way you could achieve some happiness is to the extent that there's a mismatch between your hedonic system and the modern world. And when there's a mismatch between these two, there are some mismatch which cause unhappiness and some mismatch which can cause more happiness. So you can, and we could talk more about that, but then that's one reason when you can find ways to achieve happiness by identifying this mismatch.
So are you saying here that essentially the premise is flawed, and it's something like, how can I laugh as much as possible while I tickle myself? That kind of thing. It's just never going to work.
Yeah, very much. It's very much so. It's like, I think that, let's say that's this idea that you can, find a way to set your goals could produce happiness. Well, the framework I described is that if you were to find a reliable way of finding happiness, you would form expectations. So you would habituate to, even if it's a complex process, a complex psychological process, you would eventually expect before engaging in this process that it will deliver happiness. And because you expect it, it would kind of, by design, negate the effect of it. Like if you have expectations of feeling good, eventually, because you expect them, they are not going to be surprising. And so this is a contradiction. You cannot reliably find a way to generate positive feelings because the positive feelings arise from surprise to expectations.
So let's look at what we know is a wrong strategy. As per Dr. Lyubomirsky, we want to have goals because in general, it seems that happier people have goals. We don't want our goals to be really low. So if my goal is to wake up, get out of bed, and brush my teeth, that's not going to do anything for me. And likewise, we don't want our goals to be way too high. So we don't want to wake up and say, I have to be richer than Elon Musk today. So it seems like the ideal converges something along the lines of what we already do. Do you think that's correct? That it's something like setting a goal where we are roughly at the edge of our capacity. Yeah. Because any lower than that, you start to, if it's lower than that and you fail, you get really disappointed because you think, wow, I purposely went easy and I still failed. Yet the actual amount of happiness gained from the acquisition of that goal is probably pretty low, because when you get to the end of it, you think, yeah, of course, I was right. If my goal was to go to the gym today and then I went to the gym, big whoop. For someone who's a regular gym goer, that's nothing special. And then likewise, if the goal is insurmountably high, when you fail it, you're not really feeling disappointed because that was your expectation all along.
So this framework predicts that if you set your goal optimally, your hedonic system nudges you to set your goal to the highest expectation that given if you follow the best course of action you can expect this level. There'll be uncertainty, maybe it's going to rain, maybe it's going to be sunny, whatever. So there's uncertainty in the world, but if you do the best you can do, in expectation, you can expect something. And that should be your goal. But because this is the best you can expect, and you will, as a consequence, do your best to achieve that, what can go wrong can equally go wrong up or down. So in expectations, there is as much chance that you'll be happy because you overshoot your expectations and you're more successful, as chances that you undershoot your expectations and you're unsuccessful. So the optimal goal-setting strategy that is induced by your hedonic system means that in expectation, you have as much chance of being overly satisfied for beating your goal or frustrated for not achieving your goal. So that's what I'm saying, that you feel good initially. There's no free lunch in this system. Initially, when you receive information, let's say that you're already, from the past, you already have correct expectations about what you can do. So you have already at the moment correctly used the actual information to have the right expectations. Now I give you some new information. This new information, there will be an element of surprise. And because you have the correct expectations now, there's as much chance that this surprise is positive or negative. So I can tell you, let's say you have the correct expectations now about your chance of promotion at the end of the year. Now I provide you new information. Because you have the correct expectations now, there's as much chance as my new information is positive. I tell you have more chance of promotion than you were thinking, or negative. Actually, your chances are a bit lower than we're thinking. And so your expectations, and at the moment, which is going to change how you set your goals and your expectations, is going to be, there's as much chance that you are more happy because the news is positive or less happy because the news is negative. And then once you have set this new goal and you're striving to achieve this goal, because this goal reflects your correct expectations given this new information, there's as much chance you overshoot the goal and you're more happy, or you undershoot the goal and you're less happy. So in any case, it's neutral. That's if the system is really optimal, is that it is not designed to reliably deliver happiness, because once again, the design of this hedonic system is not to deliver happiness. It's only for you to work as hard as possible. And for you to work as hard as possible, if the system was perfect, maybe it's not, but if the system was perfect, what the insight of this framework tells us is that if the system is perfect, you have, in expectation, zero happiness. You see what I mean? You have the happiness of achieving your expectations, which is what I described. So you feel, if I ask you from a scale to 0 to 10, how happy you are in general, when you meet your expectations, 7-ish. You are moderately happy. But you're only moderately happy. But besides this moderate happiness that you achieve when you reach happiness, when you reach your expectations, there is no way of getting more than that. And there is no way of getting more than that by changing how you set your goals. The system would be imperfect if you were able to game the system to get more happiness. This would be a flaw in the system.
Yeah, system gamers would be selected against because they would just game the system. It'd be like if I could just turn on the hedonic hotspots in my brain, if I could just lean back and get a heroin-like euphoria, any organism that can do that to itself and just by virtue of that ignore anything consequential to fitness is right there going to be selected against.
Right, and here we can go then to evolutionary mismatch, because obviously our system is designed for a kind of world, and it's fully possible that as the world changes, we can have access to new ways or to new things we can do, which our hedonic system would not be ready to handle and could reliably deliver positive happiness, for instance. So, you talk about drug, it's a good example. Our brain is designed with certain architecture to analyze information and produce signals of positive or negative subjective signals. And you can, if you find a drug which kind of plays with these signals and produce for free this kind of positive signal, then it would trick our hedonic system and produce reliably positive satisfaction. Okay, so what you would have is that in the short term, as evolution has not done its work, we could reliably produce positive satisfaction. You would expect that, if evolution was to take place over, once again, like maybe hundreds of thousands of years, eventually only the people who don't like this drug will actually be more likely to be successful in life. And then our brain would learn, the brain of our successors later on would kind of become immune to this kind of drug. Having said that, we can also expect that the drug might have, even if the drug is not kind of, let's say, if it's not unhealthy, it's not a drug which makes you, you're not going to die from this drug. It's not that. Let's assume hypothetically, it's not a drug which has negative health impact. If this drug just produces positive satisfaction, we can nonetheless expect some problems because we don't have just one system to assess positive and negative values. Our life is very complex. So we have like plenty of different types of decisions to make. And our hedonic system kind of produces different types of values to assess a kind of different things, a different challenge, a different decisions we have to make. And that's why happiness has different type of flavors. You don't feel the same when you eat a good meal than when you have a good evening with your friends, or or even when you have a date with your romantic partner. So you don't have the same kind of feelings because you don't have the same kind of flavor of happiness because your brain is treating different types of situations. So a drug which would give you some kind of happiness, you could think that it's likely that you'd find some type of happy flavor of some happiness, of some kind of flavor of happiness. But other part of your brain, some higher levels of your cognitions could also identify that there's a problem here. So for instance, like, let's say you take this drug and as a consequence of that, you stop doing other things. You stop seeing your friends, you stop seeing your partner because you don't need it anymore because you feel so good about this drug. Well, some part of your brain might identify that there is a conflict here. Okay, and so that's what you see in people using drugs or being addicted to something is that they feel a conflict. They can't help taking the drug, but at the same time, part of their brain says, "Wait a minute, there's a problem here. Something is missing. Your friends are missing. Your social success is missing. You're not working anymore." And so a drug to be perfectly successful, a drug would have to reproduce in your brain the whole flavor of the kind of hedonic signals that you have in a successful life, which is very rich. Like, you feel good because you're healthy, you eat well, you're warm, you have good friends, you have romantic partners, all those things. You're successful, people like you. So all these things, this rich kind of set of signals produced by your brain, it's unlikely that a drug would reproduce it, right? And so if it doesn't reproduce this kind of thing, you would have kind of tensions between the different signals. You might feel very good because, let's say, you play video game, and video games can be very addictive. So you can feel compulsively that you want to play video games, but other part of your brains keep telling you, wait a minute, you're wasting your life. Like, you want to have a good job, you want to have a good income, you want to find a good partner. And a drug, the video games, to the extent that it cannot reproduce the kind of signals that these other things will produce, you will feel tension, you will feel a frustration.
So there's some kind of real world outcome detection sort of thing. And that makes sense, that if you wanted to have a drug that could truly replace everything that the brain, in some sense, yearns for, as I suppose, as a result of human nature, it would have to tap into all these different systems. Otherwise, one would end up, as you said, with this strange mismatch where you're feeling hedonically positive, and yet you have these negative emotions or drives to do other things. And that's, as for the drugs, that's not even to mention tolerance, by which the reward just kind of decreases. which is quite unfortunate because as a strategy, it then does not work. To change topics somewhat, although this is still very related, you wrote in your series of articles on happiness, I have a quote here. It's common to think of happiness as something we could reach if we could get some of the things we want in our lives. This intuition is misleading. Happiness is designed to move away from us as we progressively achieve the things we thought would make us happy. I've read this quote twice in this conversation, and I misread it the same way both times, which is interesting. I want to talk to you about lasting happiness, which we very, very briefly touched upon but moved away from. Do you think that to any extent, lasting happiness is possible? Are you a happiness pessimist in that sense? Or do you think there are things that we can do to make our lives lastingly better subjectively?
So I guess I would start from, it's interesting your phrasing, happiness pessimistic. I think I would start by saying being a happiness pessimist, as you say, pessimistic, is a right way of starting about it. Once you say we're not designed to be happy, we're designed to be successful, I think we have to appreciate that a lot of our intuitions and a lot of our desires for the kind of conclusion we could reach are biased. We would want to believe that we can be happy. And I think that's why there is such a vibrant literature on happiness, guides to be happy, to find life satisfaction, etc. Because people want to achieve happiness, and people want solutions to achieve happiness. So once you take the position that no, happiness is a system from a hedonic system designed to make us successful, not to make us happy, the starting point is to be skeptical about this, and to be skeptical about our desire for such an answer. Okay, we are biased. Like, people would want us to come to the conclusion that yes, it's possible. That's a nicer conclusion. That's a more appealing conclusion than me telling you, sorry, it's not possible. What a dreadful thing.
As we said earlier, however, the world already is as it is. So our best bet is to model it as accurately as we can.
Exactly. It doesn't matter how much, whether you like or don't like conclusion, is whether it's true or not, which does matter. Having said that, I think there is, to some extent, and we know that there are some type of outcomes which are less prone to habituation, where you're less likely to habituate. And you mentioned earlier in the discussion status. So I think status and having higher status is one of the primary rewards. That is, your status is your social standing, how well you are perceived, esteemed by your people in your community. Okay, and for sure, for a very, very long time, our ancestors, status does matter. I mean, status does matter for us, even in communities of apes outside of humans. You look at chimpanzees; they have status hierarchies. There's the alpha male, there's the allies of the alpha male, etc. So, and that status is only to some extent based on the collective agreement, the views and the perception, the views of the individuals. It's, you're famous only because people look at you and care about you. Like, this is just the views of other people. So status in the past clearly had a positive effect on fitness. You're more likely to survive because you have a group of allies, so you're less likely to be, to be picked on because you are the center of a strong coalition. You're more likely to have to be successful finding a mate, to have children, etc. So status has clearly a positive effect on fitness, and for that reason, our hedonic system is very sensitive to identifying our status, caring about our status, identifying the steps, the actions to increase our status. And status can be achieved in different ways. One of them is prestige, for instance, like being useful to a community. People value people who are useful. And so if you're very useful, like, let's say, 10,000 years ago, if you're a very good hunter, you're useful to the community. And so your hunting skills give you status because they are useful. Okay? And you would want, as a consequence, you try to prove and to exhibit your hunting skills as a way to gain status in the community. Nowadays, status may be achieved maybe by posting interesting thing on social media and getting likes and retweets or whatever, and that gives you a standing, social recognition. And obviously it's very different from the past, but our hedonic system is going to pick up on these kind of signals of social recognition. And that is why, likes and retweets, etc., they are very much inducing hedonic answers. People chase social recognition on social media. People enjoy social recognition on social media. People hate being criticized, by a group of people on social media. So this is really our ancient kind of psychology, which is just transported into this new environment. So status is something, it looks like status is something where we habituate less. Have
you seen specific data saying that we habituate less?
Yeah, we habituate less. So it looks like, for instance, something which seems very clear is that work for males in particular, for men, if you lose your job, you don't recover as much, right? So it's more than, like, if I was to ask people, like, how happy would you be if you lose your leg? And people would say, oh my God, if I lose my leg, it's terrible. Okay. But actually, you ask people who lost their leg and they don't feel as bad as people think they would if they were to lose their leg. But it looks like, when you look at negative events, like you have divorce, you have losing your partner, whatever, people tend to recover as sad as it sounds, as whatever it sounds, but it's something that people don't recover, seems to recover as much, is losing a job for men, for instance, which I think largely linked to the status. People don't seem to recover as much. And I think, but here I don't have a precise reference in mind, but I think that similarly, high status, people enjoying high status seem to be not to habituate all the time to it. Now, if you ask me why it's the case, I think that one possible explanation is that to some extent, our hedonic system may be calibrated to identify, to form this kind of expectations. And you could kind of add some flexibility to this framework. If you say, well, if you are very much outside the range of this hedonic system, you may, in a way, still generate some kind of surprises, which are your hedonic system was not designed to anticipate this kind of level. So let's say if you're as famous as Elon Musk, I'm sure he has this level of frustration, but maybe this is a kind of fame in a world where you're which is so much larger than the type of communities we're living in before, that it's outside of the calibrated of the environment for which our hedonic system is calibrated. And for that reason, in some sense, you might still experience regularly some level of surprise relative to the kind of expectations embedded in your hedonic system. So that's maybe a bit of an abstract answer, but it's possible to kind of introduce some leeway in the framework I described for variations in outcomes, which are very much outside the kind of typical range of outcomes you would expect that our hedonic system is calibrated to kind of play with.
Do you think that the hedonic system is specifically calibrated for surprises alone? Because I can think of something that will induce positive emotion in me that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I actually talked to David Pinsoff about this in the comments for his happiness article on Substack. I went back and forth with him a little bit, and I totally forgot what he responded to me. So that's perfect. We're getting a fresh response here. But if I go and pet my dog, I will feel positive emotions, even though I'm totally unsurprised. I know that when I pet my dog, the dog is just going to enjoy the petting and nothing surprising is going to happen. So do you think that there could similarly be things such as, for example, having maybe a social connection? If I live with my family, let's say, or if I visit my family, I don't really think I'm being surprised by being around them, yet I am experiencing more happiness, I would say, than I would be if I were alone. Do you think that the surprise model can explain everything or only some of happiness?
Yeah, so let's imagine the dog. So you are in your house, and at some point, the thought crossed your mind that you could pet your dog. At that time, among all the things that you could do, there might be an element of surprise in the sense that you now think that relative to the next thing you could do in the next minutes, which was maybe nothing, the thought come to your mind that you could pet your dog and that you enjoy this idea. So you can have some consumption here. What it means is that you could tell me that would be a surprise relative to. So let's say you have like in your day you could pet your dog anytime, but there's plenty of times you don't. And at some times you have not pet your dog for a long time. You think about it, and then the idea that you could do that, an outcome which you enjoy, induce in your mind a bit of positive surprise. So you entertain the idea of petting your dog, and as a dog is here, you enjoy. So you reach your goal, and reaching your goal, you have a moderate level of expectation of happiness, reaching your expectations. All that is good. All that is compatible with the model to the extent that this is not super surprising. These kind of feelings are going to be not very strong. So, you'd see that there's a big difference between that. So there's a bit of an element of surprise in the sense that every minute you could do something different. And then as you think about it, say, oh, wait a minute, I could be petting my dog now. And you like this idea. So, that suddenly you think, oh, what I'm going to do in the next minute is different from before. I had nothing in my mind. Now I'm going to do this entertaining thing. And then you do it, and you achieve your expectations, and you have a positive level of subjective satisfactions. But these are small variations because you see the level of surprise is very small. It's very different from, you have not seen your dog for a long time, and suddenly some family member bring your dog, and you're surprised by seeing the dog. Like you're very surprised, you're very happy to from petting your dog. Your dog also is obviously very surprised and very happy to see you. So I think it's compatible. I appreciate that it sounds maybe a bit less intuitive, but I don't think that it's a contradiction with the model.
The thing is, it doesn't seem like a surprise because my prediction is precisely what happens. For example, giving the example of me going to see, let's say I haven't seen my dog in a long time. Let's say it's my sister's dog or something. I go to her house and I'm going to see the dog. I predict precisely how excited the dog is going to be, or at least with reasonable precision. So then when the dog gets excited, I still feel those positive emotions, yet I didn't subjectively feel surprise.
Yeah, you don't feel surprised. I'm not sure you need to feel surprised you don't need to feel surprised. Your hedonic system, when I say surprise, differs relative to expectation. I'm not sure you need to feel surprised. I think there's always an element of surprise because until something happens, something could to some extent not happen. I mean, and the way it happened also, it can happen in different ways. So I think if you really expect to see your dog, and if everything goes exactly as you expect, I think your hedonic reaction will be kind of muted. Achieving your expectations is going to lead you to, as I say, an above average level of satisfaction, which is part of the model. But if everything goes exactly as you perfectly pictured it, I don't think is going to be. I don't think the prediction of the model is that you can't have like an ecstatic level of hedonic reaction if everything goes as a plan you perfectly mapped out beforehand. On the other hand, I think let's say you lost your dog, 2 months ago, and somebody tells you, oh, wait a minute, we think we have found your dog, and so you go to a place where they have your dog, and I guess your happiness would be as you learn that somebody has your dog, you increase your expectations. Let's say that more to lean into what you said. They sent you a picture or maybe a video and you're 100% sure it's your dog. Okay. I think nonetheless, until you really have your dog in your hands, like there's always an element of uncertainty which is going to be resolved as you get the dog back. And so I think if you've lost your dog, you've been very frustrated by that, you got the information that no, somebody has a dog, already that increase your expectations, your aspirations, your happiness. Still, you don't have it. There's a final resolution of uncertainty to be achieved. And this final resolution of uncertainty is also going to deliver additional hedonic rewards. I think that's the key insight. So you ask a fair question, which is, does this explain everything? The model says yes. It explains everything. Doesn't mean that the model is fully right. Like you could have an alternative model. I guess that's the best model. I think the best model we have at the moment is that, yes, it does everything. Is it the final answer? Maybe not. That would be my current answer. I would be inclined to try to explain everything with this. That is, any hedonic answer has to be a reaction to variations relative to expectations. And until the uncertainty is fully resolved, there's always a residual uncertainty, and that's going to the resolution of this residual uncertainty is going to deliver a hedonic signal.
I wholeheartedly agree with your statement that the hedonic reward is never going to be as great if you fully expect what's going to happen. Me petting my dog after not having seen her for a while is going to feel good, but it's not going to feel as good as if, say, somebody comes with my dog and I don't expect it at all, and then the dog is all ecstatic and I start petting the dog. I agree wholeheartedly that will be greater, but it seems at least plausible that evolutionarily we could have something like, for example, a higher baseline hedonic tone in some sense. To give an example, let's say if we're with people, to my knowledge, empirical findings are that people tend to be happier in the moment, as per ESM data, when they're around people for almost all activities, with some exceptions, such as studying, for example. For the most part, people are happier around people. It would make sense that evolutionarily we'd have some kind of surprise unrelated system, although the surprise system is, of course, still there, such that we maybe feel better when we are around our tribe, so to speak, and then feel worse when we are alone. And it seems that the empirical data bears that out. I'm not suggesting a theory per se, but it does make sense that there would be other cases. What do you think about this?
I'm not sure about. I agree. We feel better when we're with people, but
it's not the same as when you get a surprisingly positive outcome. It's not. You're not going to feel that level of intense positive emotion. As if I were to just walk into a room with my family, it's not going to be that level of intense positive emotion. Maybe it's a somewhat of a slight rise in baseline, but it's not going to be the same as if someone came and told me you won the lottery or something along those lines. It doesn't have to be that extreme a surprise.
The framework says two things. First, when you are in a situation where you meet your expectations and you have aspirations, to be in the center of a group of friends, to be highly connected is a positive outcome. And so it makes sense that we would have that we would want to achieve that, and that our hedonic system would reward us for being there. If we achieve our expectations, once again, we should be at least moderately happy. So it's not that, we're not on a scale to 0 to 5, 0 to 10, we're not at 5, but maybe at 7. So that's one thing. And another thing is, as I said, you can kind of relax the strict model, I said, by saying that there can be a kind of a lag. The system can take some time to habituate. So if you take some time to habituate, when you are in a situation, you don't habituate in the instant. So you enjoy, like you see friends, your expectations, even if suddenly that's not surprising anymore, you expect, let's say, you go into an evening with friends. Well, after the few first minutes, you now expect to be with them for the rest of the evening, I guess. But your habituation can take time. And so you can enjoy for some time. There can be a lag into how you kind of get used to it. And so that's also a reason you can enjoy being with people for above this kind of set point that would be like around 7 on the scale from 0 to 10 for some time. I don't think it's a contradiction. What I would say is that if after a while you were to stay a long time, you would get used to it, and so the feeling also would kind of decrease, right? That would be the prediction.
I agree. It definitely would decrease. That's probably the reason it's more fun to be with friends than with family, at least at my age, where I've spent most of my life with my family, because family is a lot less novel in that sense. I'm definitely far, far more used to that.
Yeah. But you ask a good question. I don't think that, at least that's what the framework suggests. I don't see why, and it doesn't mean that I'm right. I might be wrong, a better theory might emerge later on. But I don't see why you would have a system, a hedonic system, providing consistently positive rewards when you meet your expectations. It just doesn't make sense. So I think it seems to me a more promising line of explanation to think about. Okay, to what extent there is always an element of surprise, either a surprise relative to your expectations or a surprise relative to the calibration of your hedonic system, which takes time to adjust kind of the embedded expectation in your hedonic system. And this is what creates our feeling of happiness. So now if you tell me, if we try to be as challenging as possible with this line of argument, you tell me, okay, you go to an evening with your friends. You expect to meet your friends in this evening. I think once again, it seems to me that I would try to explain this by saying, okay, as you learn that you're going to go to this evening with your friends, you move your expectations up, and already you enjoy expecting to see your friends. And then as you see your friends, maybe you have a time to habituate to be with them, and there's an element of surprise because even just until the evening with your friends happen, as it doesn't happen, it's not fully realized. So as it starts being realized, there's still a residual, maybe it's small, but there's still a residual element of uncertainty which is resolved and that you can enjoy. Plus the fact that you achieve your expectations, so you should have at least above average level of happiness. And that I would be tempted to explain this like that.
Okay. Do you think that, I'm curious what you think about this, because what you said makes sense about, from a design perspective, a baseline reward, a lasting reward in that sense doesn't entirely make sense. Do you think that potentially that could be the case for certain goods where more is not necessarily better? For example, status is for sure not an example of this. The more status, the better. But let's say number of tribe members in some sense. When I say tribe members, I mean family, friends, etc. It's not as if the more friends, the better. You do reach somewhat of a ceiling. So it's probably better to have friends, but only up to a certain level, at which point more isn't necessary. Do you think this, as I say this, I can hear your objections in my head. I'll let you say it.
Yeah, look, I don't think so. I think this view about the hedonic system is not contingent, doesn't depend on the type of the nature of the type of stuff that you care about below it. If something is always good, then basically your hedonic system should just identify the highest level of this always good stuff you could achieve if you do your best, and reward you for doing a bit better and penalize you for doing a bit worse. Okay, and that's the way you're going to be optimally incentivized to do your best. Now, if this kind of thing is not always good, but there's a maximum level that you should achieve. Like let's say, there's so much you can eat during an evening. So if you eat too much, you'll get sick. So there's an optimal level of food you should ingest, to be good and not to be sick. Obviously, actually, when I say optimal, it's optimal for ancestors, and we eat too much now because food is not as scarce. So when food was scarce, and suddenly you have plenty of food available, you should eat a lot to take on to save for later, like in your body. But nowadays it's not the case anymore. But anyway, if you don't think about this thing, there's an optimal level of food, and above that you will feel bad. In that case, the system should be the same. Basically, you should identify this best level and penalize you for going below. And if you can achieve this level, then basically that's it. You should aim for this level, have full reward for achieving this level, and being penalized for being below. If you cannot achieve this best level, then once again, whatever the highest level you can achieve, you should be rewarded for going a bit above this best level you can achieve, as long as you don't go beyond the maximum level you should not go beyond, and should be penalized for going below. So whether the kind of thing you're aiming for is always good, or whether there is, a highest level you want to go and not be and not going above that, I don't think it's not conceptually challenging for the system to describe. It works as well for these two things. It doesn't deliver a different insight.
Okay. We have run 2 hours thus far, and I can already feel my brain lagging. So to wrap up, I have a final question for you. It's about your articles, actually. The question is, if you were rewriting them today, because I think it's been just over a year since you wrote those articles, are there any substantial modifications you would make? Is there anything you would want to add or change or subtract?
No, there's nothing I would like to add or to change. I would not change. There are things I would add, but simply because, I would not add to this. When I wrote this first line of articles, I had a very long list of potential articles, and I basically cut this list, and I may have written 2/3 of it or maybe half of it. So there's plenty of other topics I would be able to write on. Things I didn't talk about, for instance, like why do we experience regret? Or why do we experience feelings of happiness when we do things well, like the sense of mastery, the feelings where, if you play tennis, you hit a nice forehand and you're happy with just, the way you delivered it. Why do we have these kind of feelings when you, do something and it could be a cake, you bake a very nice cake and you're happy to observe that this cake looks good. Why do we have these kind of feelings? Feelings which come from the sense of having done something well. Why do we like to play? Why do we like to, role play? Why do kids, like puppies or kids, play fight all the time? So all these kind of things, I think, is another thing I would be talking about is why are we curious? Why are people listening to this podcast, which is about knowledge? Why do we enjoy knowledge? I think these are very interesting questions, and all these questions, I get nice answers from this perspective of saying, well, happiness is to guide us and help us make good decisions. And I'll quickly, provide you a preview of the answers that I would be about these three things I said. Why do we experience regret? Well, I think regret is a way, basically, our hedonic system is providing late reward or late penalties in that case, but also reward because you have like the surprise of having done better than expected, which we could call elation. Some people call that elation. So why do we experience regret? Well, it's a penalty which is exposed after the fact. We experience for not having made the right decision. And that in expectations at the time when I make a decision, I'm induced to try to look for the best information I can have to make sure I make the right decisions because I don't want to experience regret afterwards. Okay. And basically regret is when nature picks up later on information, I call nature weight. When our hedonic system picks up later on information, which reveals that we didn't make the right decision before, by penalizing us then in expectations, it motivates us before to make the right decision then. Because we think that, if ever some information was to transpire later, that was not a right decision, I will regret. So because we don't want to experience that later, we are induced actually to work harder to make the right decision now.
So it's like a threat of extra cost.
Yes.
For insufficient preparation.
Yes, it's like because suppose for instance, like you could, when you make a decision, you could decide with the information you have, or you could look for extra information. Okay, and your hedonic system, if your hedonic system just rewards you for your making decisions given your expectations, maybe given the information you have, you think this is good, this is bad, you make the right decision. You make the decision for, you choose A instead of B. And because it's given the information you have, it looks like the better decision. But if your hedonic system only reward you given your prior expectation, then whether you learn afterwards that A was a good or bad decision would not have any impact. And maybe that would not induce you at the time of making the decision to try to make sure that your expectations is based on the right level of information. What tells you that, the framework I described before doesn't say that it should induce you to look for more information. It just tells you, given your information, you have expectations. So how does your hedonic system make sure that not only you make the right decision given your expectations, but also you do the right thing to form correct expectations? Well, to do the right thing to form correct expectations, you are penalized if eventually you find out that your expectations were wrong, right? And then now you need to anticipate this penalty, that you need to anticipate that if new information arises that is in contradiction to what you were thinking, you will be penalized, which means that this gives you an incentive now to make sure that you're not leaving any stone unturned, that you make sure that your expectations are correct. So I think regret is a way to motivate you now to make sure that you're forming the correct expectations and you're not being lazy or not looking for available relevant information which you could use to make correct expectations. So that's regret. I said also...
Well, you said curiosity and mastery.
Well, they're really related. I said you should have happiness to your head. You should identify the goals about what you can do best. But once again, how do you collect information about what you can do best? Well, you should be rewarding for learning how well you do. And just for learning how well you're able to do in an environment, you should feel good about these learning things, because this induces you to try to kind of collect more information about your ability to be successful in an environment. And a lot of what we identify as play, like kids play fighting, etc., it's actually us learning through our actions how good we are. And when we learn that we're a bit better than we were expecting in the environment, we should feel good about it, because that nudges us to try to new things, to try to see whether we can be even better. So, the feeling you get when you play sports, for instance, there's different types of hedonic rewards involved in sports. But one of the rewards is just doing something well. And when you execute a movement well, why do we feel good about it? Is because this is a kind of rewards which induces us to try to see how good we can be. Because our hedonic system is trying to nudge us to learn how good we can be. What is the best thing we can do? And for that, we need to be rewarded whenever we learn a bit. Oh, actually, I've improved how I'm hitting the ball in tennis. You feel good about that. That will induce you to try to hit even better, and that way you'll try as much as possible to find what is until you reach your top level achievement you can reach. So that's what we play to learn. We like to play. We like to learn. We like to feel the sense of mastery. That's the reward for progressing towards learning how good we can be. And finally, curiosity. There's two types of value of information. There is what we call the instrumental value of information. I can give you now information which is useful in your practical life. So, for instance, if you want to buy a car, I can tell you this is a better car because given what you need, the type of driving you do, this is going to be a more suitable car for your driving. It's practical information. But there's also more general information about the kind of model of the world that you can have. And this information is going to be useful more in a diffuse way across your life. So if I give you information about human psychology, it's not necessarily something which is going to be useful tomorrow in a specific situation. But maybe it can help you in all your social interactions, helps you understand what's going on and navigate the world just a bit better. And that information is valuable. And so it's normal for us to be curious, because being curious is experiencing satisfaction from getting information which is changing our model of the world in a way which we think is going to be useful in this kind of diffuse way across our life. There's so much things you could learn. I could talk to you about quantum physics, etc. A lot of it, lots of it is just too complex or too abstract for it to be interesting to us. But we will be curious about the kind of abstract general information which help us understand the world in a way which is relevant to us and is going to help us in this diffuse way across all the situations we face. So, these are the kind of stuff I could be talking about maybe in a future series of posts on happiness.
I look forward to those if they happen to come. So, Lionel Page, thank you very much for talking to me. I will link in the description your Substack so that people can read your excellent sequence of articles, as well as see any new ones that may or may not come out in the future. I will link your book, Optimally Irrational, maybe future happiness book, maybe. We'll see. And then, of course, any socials you have. Is there anywhere else you want people to find you?
Oh, yeah, I'm on Twitter and on Substack mainly, but so people interested can read the post. I talk a lot about, I had this long series on happiness. Now I'm talking a lot about all the things, but the perspective is really about evolutionary and economic perspective to explain human psychology and social interactions. That's the perspective of the Substack. In my opinion, two of the most interesting perspectives that there are. But I may or may not be a little bit biased there. Thank you very much for talking to me. Thanks, Nicola. If you like this episode, I think you'll like one of these two episodes here. This one is one about evolutionary psychology with Dr. David Pinsoff, which is similar in topic and approach to this one. And this one is one picked by the YouTube algorithm specifically for you.